Right, John. So I think we can go ahead and get started. As I'm assuming that people kind of start coming into the room a little bit after the hour, and I'll just basically manage that as that happens. But for those of you who are currently on the call, thank you very much for joining. This is going to be a presentation from John Vetan and Design Sprint Academy on problem framing and Design Sprint 3.0. John's offered to graciously, John's great. Let's try this again. Time to base topics because we're to then have someone like me mislead folks on how to do proper problem framing. I think this having John here is going to do two things. One is to set me straight, but two is also to communicate the value of problem framing, how he kind of landed upon it, and basically to showcase why it is so important, especially for those that are doing design sprints in the enterprise. And being in that space and getting everyone aligned on what exactly you're going to be doing the design sprint for is critical in terms of a success component. But John will be doing a presentation first. If you have any questions that you want to ask of John, feel free to post them in the chat here in Zoom, and I'll get to those. There are also a few that some of you have posted back in the Facebook group that I'll also be addressing and kind of bringing up. But I will act as the moderator for the session. We would appreciate if you, at least for the presentation, you keep your microphones off so that there isn't any background noise or interference from your end, inadvertent or otherwise. And when it comes time to the Q&A, we'll probably open that up a bit more, but for at least this first part where John's presenting, we'll just make it so he's the only person talking. So John, if you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
I'm ready, thank you. I'm actually chuffed, if this is a word.
All right, you got me there. I'm glad you actually brought that up. And by the way, I'll start my video so you know I'm not a disembodied like icon.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Now it's good to see some faces besides mine here. Okay. Hi, Holly.
Right. Hello.
Right. Yes. So let's start. We're ready. Okay. So I'm going to start with a short presentation on problem framing and the way we're running design sprints. I'm going to take you through a couple of stories and case studies, and then we're ending up with some Q&A. Okay. So I should start maybe with a little bit of an introduction. And I wish these things works. Yes. So I'm John. I'm the CEO of the Design Sprint Academy. But before that, I was a co-founder at New Haircut, which is actually a digital product studio where we introduced design sprints about 3 years ago. And as you can see, I had many hats there. And nowadays, what I'm doing the Design Sprint Academy, where I'm a facilitator, strategist, and the CEO of the company. A little bit about Design Sprint Academy, so we know who we are. We started with design sprints back in 2016 when we ran our first one in New York City. Actually, that's from a small WeWork room we were in. And it was our very first design sprint, quite imperfect by today's standards, but we had an excuse. There was no book out. That only came a little bit later. And indeed, it filled in some gaps, and it just made us do more and more design sprints. And then later that year, also in New York City at the Startup Institute in New York, I think we've done what was the first design sprint workshop ever. It was like a very short one. It was just a 2-hour one, but our real training followed up later that year in Berlin, where we launched the first 2-day design sprint training workshop. And it's been a while since then. Ever since that was design sprint workshop focused on the design sprint process, but we've evolved our offering, and we created the problem framing before the design sprint, and also because people want to have the confidence and the knowledge to actually facilitate sprints, we added the design sprint facilitation workshop. So we're offering all of these 3 programs in our 5-day bootcamp, which we're doing pretty much all over the world. So there's like lots of spots there still to go to South America and Africa. So we haven't done that yet. And yeah, and we're working with plenty of companies, Google, Adidas, Red Bull among them, but like plenty of other brands. As you can see, lots of people using design sprints nowadays. Good. So I'm going to jump right into the subject, which is why frame the problem. And what I want to talk to you about is a little story, because we learned about problem framing by banging our head against the walls, right? And I wouldn't want other people to do the same mistakes. A few years ago, when we just got started, we had one of our first design sprints. I'm not sure if it's okay to call it a fair design sprint, but definitely could have been a lot better had we done problem framing. So long story short, we have this, this company, it's a startup, it's a funded startup, and they approached us saying that, hey, we're stuck. We've been working on this for over a year and we don't know where to take our product. And what you see on the screen is the type of materials they came up with. So they already had mockups. As you can see, they had like all of the features figured out from MVP to phase X, you know, a really detailed feature list, backlog. So it all looked very legit. The startup, what they were doing, they were trying to solve the clutter in your photo folder, right? Because everybody takes a lot of pictures, but then it's a really big pain sorting them. So they thought, okay, let's build an app that helps you sort your pictures and clean up your photo folders on your phone. It's like, okay, now so let's do this. And we set up the sprint. We did it in Berlin, but actually people were flying from London, from Scotland, from Romania at the time. So it was like quite some logistics involved. And then we're starting the sprint. Everyone's like excited about the process and what we're going to discover. And then first day when we're doing expert interviews at the end of Monday is we're asking someone in the room, hey, how many pictures do you have on your phone? And they're like 47,000. Okay. And then we ask around the room and they like had like 50,000, 40,000, 30,000. So apparently none of these people who actually put money into the product had a problem with too many pictures on their phones. And then later the day, like as our team huddled up after the day, we looked and we saw that there's Apple doing Apple Moments. You have Google Photos with AI sorting photos. And actually they didn't have a real problem. And then we walked into the room next day and said like, guys, we'd love to take you to the rest of the sprint. However, we don't think that there is a real problem and the market for your product. You know, so I think we totally missed the mark with this sprint. And indeed, in the sprint, what we did, we pivoted and we created another platform, which was a storytelling app for children using photos. So we pivoted, but it was like, we were lucky to be able to do that. And we could have avoided this by just not even doing research. It's just asking a question, how many pictures do you have on your phone, to a few folks before the design sprint. And that would have saved so much time and resources. Right, so that's when we realized like problem framing is important, and then we went into several other projects where more or less the same happened. It's like we need to do something, and that's when we developed the problem framing workshop, which we did the very first one at Google in San Francisco at their own Sprint Academy, where we trained, I think it was about 30 Sprint masters from Google, and then people from other brands like Nike, Adobe, PayPal. So we had a full house, as you can see over there. Huge interest in problem framing. So why do we do problem framing? So it's to define the purpose and scope of your decisions, right? To also identify, you know, and set up your success criteria. And not, the lastly is to reduce or avoid destructive biases, which we all have in our brains, right? And we can't sense them. So that's why we need to always work with an external standard to keep these things in check. We really love quotes, and problem framing is important because a problem clearly stated is a problem half solved, right? The design sprint is the fun part already. So when to frame the problem, and I'm going to give you this answer in the context of design sprints. Design sprints, I mean, all of you know that they're hot, you know, it's a hype. Everyone wants to do design sprints. And why is that? Because at the end of design sprints, you get the prototype, and the prototype is something tangible. It's something that's an answer already, you know. It makes everyone feel very productive. They can show progress. Look, we've moved so fast into just 5 days or less. The problem with that, though, is the fact that you may answer a question that no one has asked, right? Because a prototype can help you refine an idea that's already good. It cannot tell you whether you're solving the right problem in the first place. Now, and getting to that problem, it's something that's very uncomfortable because you need to ask questions, you know, and people usually don't like being there. They would rather be building that prototype and working towards that. So we're doing problem framing 2 to 3 weeks before the design sprint. And why we're doing that? We're doing that so we can recruit the right sprint team, right? You don't want to go into a design sprint where your challenge is about something financial, and then you notice you don't have Bob from accounting in your sprint team, right? We want to make sure we have the right kind of experts into the team. Also, we want to make sure that we can set up external experts, because not everyone can make the team. We want to invite certain people in Ask the Expert stage. Also, we want to know who's our user, right? Because we need to be able to recruit people to test in the last day of the sprint. And then it's not something that you can decide the first day of the sprint. For example, we've had once a design sprint where our testers were neurosurgeons. Like, what are the chances that you decided on a Monday and then by Friday you have 5 neurosurgeons lined up? Like, I think they're like quite slim. And then also in problem framing, you can see what kind of gaps you have in your information, and then you can conduct some research if needed. And when I say research, I'm not talking about doing months or even weeks of research. It's just enough to ask a few questions, right? So you can, I don't know, enable your team or give your team enough insights to come up with a good output in a design sprint, right? Because why would you use a team of experts to basically do your first design sprint as a research sprint, right? Like, why would you use your stakeholders and key executives to do that when you can just ask a couple of questions for 2 days and get those answers and insights into your sprint? And we have like this time frame in between, so we can just make sure we get all of these things sorted before the design sprint. How does it work, right? How do you start? I mean, you just need to gather all of the sources you have available on your topic, whether it's qualitative or quantitative research, you know, interview internally and externally to figure out, okay, who are my stakeholders, who should be in this workshop, who knows anything about my challenge, and then you synthesize the data, and together with your stakeholders, run a problem framing workshop, which typically takes from half a day to a day. What you're doing in the workshop, you define and prioritize the business problems, you discover and understand who your target user is, and then with the team align on the core opportunity and say, like, yes, this is what we're going to sprint on. Who should join the problem framing workshop? I mean, it could be here a long story, but essentially it's internal stakeholders at this time, and it's whoever has a direct interest in your challenge or whoever can kill the project. Because one thing that's about design sprint, it's really important that there is follow-up, right? Like, you wanna make sure that that outcome you worked a week on is going to be executed, and you can't do that without the buy-in. And this buy-in is something that you need to get before the design sprint. It's not after. So that's why it's so important to have these people in the framing workshop so they can make the decisions, and then you just execute on them. So what happens in a problem framing workshop? I mean, it's a little bit of an animation, but basically you're in the present, you know, and you have this challenge that in the future, maybe it's your long-term goal, it's going to take you to this bright, ideal future. But in order to get there, first you need to learn from the mistakes or maybe other successes you had in the past. So what we're doing in the framing workshop, we're looking at the past, so we know like how to get into the future. That's part of it, and this is like related to our business, right? Just in case this metaphor is too complicated. So we're looking at our past initiatives, past failures, you know, in order to make sure we're not repeating the same mistakes when we get into the future. That's half of the equation. The other one is we need to decide who our customer is, right? Like, whose problems are we solving? What do our customers want? right? So maybe they want to be living on the edge, right? Maybe that's what they want to do. How are they doing it today? It's really important to understand that in order to come up with maybe a better solution. And they may have different means of doing that. And by looking at all of these things, we can spot where there's some pains and where we can have some opportunities. And then putting it all together, our customer and then our business, we can decide, yes, this is a problem, this is a challenge that's worth investing it. You know, we're going to run a sprint on it. In terms of the agenda, this is how one of the agendas look like for the problem framing. We start by contextualizing the problem, right? So we're not looking necessarily at that problem and trying to see everything around it. We're then justifying the business need. We're always starting with the business need, because as much as we want everyone to be human-centered and doing design thinking and being around the customer, the reality of the things is most of these initiatives start with the business, right? It's someone always saying, we need to build this, we need to launch this, we need to do that, and it's totally fine. So we're starting with the business need. Like, why do you want to do that? Why is it important? What do you want to achieve? How are you going to measure success? Like, we're looking at all of these things with key stakeholders, decision makers. And then once we're doing that and we're very clear on why this challenge is important for the business, we're moving into understanding the customer. Right, so you want to do this. Is there anyone that really wants to buy these things? We're looking at who the customer is, what are their pain points, what are they doing today? And then we're just, we're putting all of this together, and then we're just trying to find where the opportunity is, having all of this shared knowledge. And at the end, we're having the stakeholders agree. You may find like maybe 4 or 5 opportunities after a framing session. So you're starting with something, and you may end up with 5 really good challenges for a design sprint. So at the end, you need to have the stakeholders prioritize and say like, yeah, we're going to run 5 design sprints, or no, we're just going to take the top one and run a design sprint on it, whatever it is. But after this, you have a very clear direction, and you have your stakeholders buy-in, because it was them who decided this is a worthwhile challenge for your design sprint. This is how our design sprint 3.0 process looks like. We're starting with problem framing. Yeah, we call it day 1, okay? And then there is 1-2 weeks pass, and then we have the design sprint, the actual design sprint. A very common mistake, and it's something that we've done also, is to do problem framing right before the design sprint. If you do that, yes, it helps with the understanding part and the definition of the problem, but it doesn't allow you enough time to, as I said, recruit the right team, you know, make sure you fill in your gaps or whatever it is, or even like recruit the right team members. So it's really okay to do it 1-2 weeks before the sprint. Now, I think it's much easier with examples, and I want to show you a couple of case studies. Yeah, so this is a more detailed look of the design sprint 3.0. We have problem framing, where we need to check these boxes, defining the right challenge, stakeholder buy-in, picking the right team, and then understanding your users. And then the sprint looks, it's a 4-day sprint. The first day is quite similar to the original design sprint process, but we enhance certain exercises, and the biggest change that we've done is introducing empathy into the first day of the sprint. We're introducing the user day 1, so the team can use those insights in order to come up with better solutions. Because like, how can you solve a problem for someone you don't understand, right? So that's what we introduced into the design sprint, and yeah, we improved the how might we and the long-term goal and questions exercises. Day 2 of the design sprint is lightning demos and solution sketch in the morning when people are fresh, and I think that was quite an important change we've made, because if you're sketching at the end of the day when the team is already tired, or also like if you're sketching the same day you're also discussing about the problem, the output tends to be not so good, because people are like, yeah, we just want to get out of here. So we move that to be in the morning of the second day. And then we're ending the day with the decision and storyboard. And then day 3 of the design sprint is prototyping, and day 4 is testing. So this is how the process looks. So now the case studies, and I'm going to give you two case studies, one or two projects we worked on and where we used problem framing. One of them is one project where we had absolutely no user research, and the other one is the opposite. We had way too much user research and data. So let's go with the first one. Now, we got this client and they approached us, hey, we want to build a community area on our website and get lots of logins and user activation. Like, we're fine, that's okay. Their user base was millions of people, so like really huge user base. So we thought like, oh, this is a big company, definitely we have some data to work with. Turned out we didn't. But also this kind of challenge was way too broad for one design sprint. Like, how would we know what features to build in there if we don't know what our users do, who they are? And plus, as I said, it's a very large audience that they were having. So we asked them, who's your user? And then the answer was something along the lines, well, it's everyone who's into sports and music. Obviously, that's again too broad to discover real problems and insights. So we said like, okay, let's start. And so we're going to apply this process. Definitely there is a need for problem framing here. And we as Design Sprint Academy, we started this project with these three challenges. How might we help them narrow down the audience to a target user segment that's relevant? How might we discover a real problem to solve so that we know what kind of features should be built into that community area? And how might we help our client team to focus the sprint on the right opportunity? So these were like our objectives for problem framing. And these were like some answers we needed, right? What's the context of our audience? What are the stakeholders' expectations? We're talking a very large organization here. What are their goals and how are they achieving today? Talking about the audience, where are the biggest pains? So these were like some of the questions we had. Because they didn't have any kind of data, what we did, we picked together with them, so like, let's do the design sprint for the skiing audience, because this is an audience that's really relevant to us. So what we did, we did 4 qualitative interviews with people from this group. So we just discussed a few criteria, not a lot of them. And then why we wanted to do these interviews, we wanted to better understand how they interact with the brand and within the community whenever they're participating into events or they're like just watching or consuming media content. So we did these 4 interviews, I think, with the script, setting them up in the calendars and talking to users. It took overall like 2 days of work. And then we came up with these rough versions of experience maps. And one of them was regarding an offline experience, people participating into events and watching in races. And the other one, it's an online experience when they did the same in, I don't know, just watching online. And these were like far from being perfect, right? It was, they were done by us based on the interviews and the data we collected. So, and then with this, we said like, okay, let's do the problem framing workshop. And the problem framing workshop was this one. This is the agenda. We started with some introductions, covered what is the business need, why you're doing this project, why do you need this community area, right? Then understanding the customer experience, where we review the research that we've done and try to put together their experience. And then at the very end, we're trying to see, okay, so what's our biggest opportunity? What should be our design sprint challenge? So that was the agenda we started with. We brought in these maps into the workshop, and together with the team on the client side and with experts from their company, starting with what we put together, we filled in all of the experiences. And by the end of the day, this was the result. It was like a huge wall of Post-its, but it was a very clear picture of their customer experience, both online and offline. And that actually enabled them to pick up the design sprint challenge, right? It became very clear. And this kind of map, it didn't only It's not something that is lost after a framing workshop. We actually turned that into a mural, right? And now they're using this map each time they want to run a design sprint. They're just like looking at it, spotting where like the biggest, the next big opportunity is, and they're running a design sprint on it. Basically, in a design sprint, you're just picking a section of this map and you're zooming in on it, right? And you're trying to solve for that particular area. So to say, it's a living artifact which gets updated with every design sprint, right? And it's a great tool for alignment around the team. And now they're building other similar maps for their other audiences, right? Because this is just for the skiing audience, but then there's music, there's movies, there's like a lot of other stuff. Good, so this was one of the case studies that I wanted to show you. Yeah, and afterwards we ran the design sprint. And then the other one is too much information. And we've been approached about a year ago with by a company, large organizations also, and they had like this big plan. And as you can see, I think the design sprint was like slotted in like week 8 after like 2 months of research. And by the time they approached us, they had lots of research done in Berlin and in London. It was actually, when they took us through their research, it took 1 hour just to show us the Dropbox folder structure in which they organized the research. And then in the design sprint, they also brought the printed research. It was like this thick, a folder this thick. So they came, this was the kind of research that they showed us: surveys, interviews, and then just imagine PowerPoints with pages of data and numbers and graphs and like tens, hundreds of pages. So this is what they had. So obviously there's like way too much data, and they felt stuck. They didn't make any sense of it. So we started we took the same approach, started with problem framing, and our challenges were how might we make sense of the data and extract the relevant insights? How might we align them around the same understanding of the problem? And then obviously, how might we help them pick the biggest opportunity? We had 1 day for the problem framing workshop, but we had like some time to prep it before. So what we actually did together with their product team, which was, I think we worked in this project with 2 product managers, we had them do this kind of experience map. It was a challenge around dining out. So basically it was someone going from the moment they decide to go to a restaurant until they leave the place. So what we asked them to do was map the research and all of those numbers and quotes on this kind of experience map. And that's something that we built remotely with the product team before the framing workshop. As you can see, some of the swim lanes, like feelings, pain points, opportunities, are fairly empty, and there's a reason for that. The reason is we filled those into the problem framing workshop. So we've done this pre-work where we try to put all of that research into a format that's a lot more digestible and understandable for people. And then we started the workshop. We also had like customer personas, so on and so forth. Problem framing workshop. As you can see, it's fairly simple. At 10 a.m., we started with some project background and tried to review the research that they've done, like in 5 minutes, meaning this is the research we've done and this was the methodology, because we were not curious of reading through hundreds of pages of reports. And then we introduced the map. And then what we asked them to do was to really empathize with the customer going through that experience. And I think we used role playing going through this restaurant experience. And then based on that, we tried to come up with how might we, which are basically opportunities, which turned into the design sprint challenge. What we did is like all of this mural that you see here, we actually printed out the yellow, the blue Post-its, and we put them in our office, on our office walls. So it was like really easy for the stakeholders to interact with the research every step of the customer experience. And then what they did, what we asked them to do is based on the research, which was quotes or stats or whatever it is there, so both qualitative and quantitative data, we asked them to come up with pain points and different opportunities over there, which you can see there at their how might ways. And we had like 2 walls full of this, so it was huge. And then by the end of it, what happened, we ended up with a few how might ways, which they voted on and prioritized. And as you can see from a framing session like this, they ended up with a backlog of 5 design sprints, and then they tackled the top one. Obviously, we ran the design sprint afterwards. I think I've been talking a lot. All right, so I think this is it. Robert, we can go into the Q&A.
Sure. It was funny. You just had the realization, wow, I passed a lot of information, but it was fantastic. I loved the presentation. Thank you so much for doing it.
No problem.
Especially the case studies. As soon as you had showed the one about the too much information, I was just sitting there on the other side of my head going, yep, I recognize those immediately.
Yeah.
And I will say that the minion that you had with the alarm bells is usually the one I hear whenever I'm trying to get up in the morning. So very nice use of graphics. So for the Q&A portion of this, we'll do it 2 ways. First is I'm going to tackle the posted questions on Facebook that were sent over to John ahead of time. And then we'll go ahead and address the ones on the call. Now you can do this one of 2 ways. I think I'm going to experiment a little bit, John. If you are interested in asking a question verbally, meaning that you want to ask John directly, and you don't mind doing it, you can turn on your video. That'll give me a visual indication that you are interested in kind of asking John a direct question. I'll unmute your microphone. It's up there. If you are someone who does not want anyone to see what you look like, feel free to go ahead and populate the Zoom chat with a question, and I'll go back and forth between in-person video and the chat that's currently in Zoom, and we'll field it from there. But first, let's go to the Facebook group and see what's been posted there. So, John, I'll ask questions randomly from there, but I'll start with the very first one that was posted by Federico Crispo. And he says, what if the client doesn't want or can't be involved on the problem framing process and they just want to participate in the design sprint?
I mean, why would they? Why wouldn't they want this? I mean, I think it's actually very rare that would happen, and mostly because what happens with the clients is they don't know what the problem is, and then a framing workshop, it takes so much less time than an entire design sprint. Most of the time is the other way around, right? So they're like, why should we do a design sprint? But then what you can do if they really insist in doing this is like just show them what could happen if you don't do problem framing. For example, we're just wasting a week worth of time to maybe do research, right? And or not having a really quality outcome because you didn't have all of the necessary insights or knowledge or the right people on the team or the right experts. So all of these things are a direct result of problem framing, you know? So problem framing sets the stage for a successful design sprint.
And from what I gathered from your presentation, it seems like it conveys confidence in the direction you will go in before you even start.
Of course, exactly. Yeah. With much less resources that are involved with a design sprint, right?
Exactly. So Daniel Hera, I'm gonna, all right. Just let you know in advance.
You should know Spanish, right? You should know Spanish. You're in Texas or like
I should, but I'm going to destroy some of these names, and I mean no disrespect, but that's just me making mistakes. So Danielle says, what are the minimum aspect of a problem or situation to consider for having a good problem framing?
This is, I mean, I'm not even sure where to start answering this, but basically in a problem framing process, you can bring any type of problem that you want stakeholders or some key stakeholders wanna solve, you know, and then you're taking it from there. when you're taking it then through the problem framing process, I think there are two dimensions you need to look at for every problem. One is like the business part, and the other one is the customer part. And you're trying to map them both. If you have a problem that's only important for the business, but doesn't solve any kind of customer problem, maybe an external or an internal one, maybe that's not worth doing. The same way, if you have a problem that maybe is quite important for a customer to have solved, but it doesn't make money for the business, again, maybe you don't want to pursue it, right? So I think having these two dimensions, or identifying these two dimensions, the business and the customer in your problem, I think that's quite important.
Great. And Hope, who is on the call as well, posted, how do you address questions regarding scope?
I don't have to address them myself, through the process, they're going to be addressed by themselves. As they go through this entire experience, at one point they realize, okay, we can't tackle everything in one design sprint, because all of a sudden you're starting with something, and then you end up with having lots of other problems. So it becomes quite obvious that you need to focus on something, but that's why you need to show the big picture first, right? And that's when all of the discussions regarding scope become much easier once you understand everything.
Good. And Frederico's back, and he says, how do you know which would be the correct sprint team?
Again, it's not me or a facilitator that knows that, but once you understand the problem, right, and you know what the problem is, you will know what kind of experts to bring in. Do we need more tech? Do we need more finance in here? Do we need, I don't know, gardeners? It really depends on your type of challenge. But that's why it's so important to understand the problem, because once you do that, you will know, like, yeah, these 3-5 people are going to, we need them in our design sprint. The downside is not doing it, and starting a design sprint, and then all of a sudden you see you're missing key people. That's something that could happen.
Yep. I've been in design sprints in the past where there's one person that everyone names that needs to, like a subject matter expert of some type, that absolutely needs to inform the team. And sometimes that individual is just really hard to get a hold of, but I can definitely relate how mission critical people, not only on the sprint team, but also informing the sprint team, are needed.
Also, like similar to that, like we were once in a design sprint, and we didn't do any kind of problem framing there. And during the second day of the design sprint, during the first day when we're doing Ask the Experts, someone comes in and all of a sudden it's like, hey, and after we're showing the goal, the sprint questions, the map, like whatever we worked during that day, they're like, oh, but we're doing this in another business unit. And also, so basically, again, we had to kill the sprint because it's been done. Like with this type of large organizations, sometimes they don't know what each of their departments are doing, or different business units, right? Or even like departments in other countries. That's why doing problem framing is so important, because you can see when you're exploring the business space, you can ask a question like, have we done something like this before? Have we done any initiatives in the past? You can like spot these kind of situations, and you're not going into a design sprint that's actually being already done, let's say.
Yeah. Bezahad has a couple of questions. He asks how to design a solution using the benefits of the design sprint system if you're working solo/freelance on a project. And the second question he has is, what's the best approach to run a sprint in a remote team with complete opposite time zones and availabilities?
All right, so the first question I think I can answer. You need to have a team. Like I think design sprint, yes, you can take some of the activities and methodologies and apply to yourself, to work in a more structured way. But I think the value of design sprints comes from working as a team, as a cross-functional team with different perspectives, and then the output is, it's a lot better. So I would say like get a team, right? Get other freelance people that are experts in the problem, and work like that. As for the second question, Robert, I think you're much more qualified to answer that kind of thing. And I think you're doing it right now. It's like we're part of this whole thing.
It's the grand experiment to see what exactly virtual sprints can do.
Yeah, it's that I'll field that question offline because I can probably answer Bazak directly. I, in fact, I just met him this week, so we'll go that route. Let's go to Oh man, I'm sorry. Mahalo. I'll forget it. Mahalo.
Just read the question, yeah.
I almost feel like I'm saying in a Hawaiian hello, goodbye. Do you include end users in problem framing? If yes, how? If no, why not?
As you could see in our case studies, we include information from the users, right? So we're running the interviews and we're bringing that kind of data into the problem framing to make sense of it. However, in one of those case studies, in the first one, we did have actual users, skiers, coming into the workshop, and they helped us fill in that huge map that you saw on the wall. So we did involve the users. However, whenever we're involving users, either in problem framing or in a design sprint workshop, they have equal rights as everyone. So we're not looking at the user as, let's say, as a god, right? Whatever the user says, they're right. No, they're like just one team member, just like everybody else. They're subject matter expert. Their viewpoint is no more important than other one in the team.
They give a dimension of the overall problem.
Yes, absolutely, exactly.
So Amir has 60,000 questions. No, I'm kidding. He has several. I'll go through them one by one, and then I think they'll probably follow up. The questions naturally follow up from there. So his first one is, if you have a problem framing session before the sprint, isn't there a risk of everybody coming the next day with what they think is the solution for the problem?
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, several answers to this question. The first one is don't try to make it the next day. You know, as I said, like leave it a little bit of time in between problem framing and design sprint, so you have enough time to recruit your team, to schedule users, schedule interviews. You know, fill in the research gaps if you have any. And then the other one, which I think is quite important, not the problem framing team is not the same as the design sprint team, right? Usually in the problem framing, you get decidents, you get key stakeholders, more like senior executives who are able to make these decisions. Yes, this is important. This is what we're going to do. This is what you should be working on. And then in a design sprint team, you have subject matter experts who are capable of solving that problem once decisions have been made and you have the buy-in, right? Yeah, there's like, for an easy handoff, maybe you have one or two people from the problem framing workshop be in a design sprint team, preferably you're a decider, but for the most part, they're different teams.
Okay.
So I'm hoping, and then the third answer to this question would be, I mean, the same thing could happen in a sprint, right? Once you announce what the challenge is, everyone has an idea of the solution, and it's like so hard to keep them like, let's not rush up. Let's go through the goal. Let's go through the questions. Let's go through the map before we jump into solutioning. Got it.
And I think you answered the rest of his questions just through that first answer. So.
Oh, good.
Yeah, wanted to be. But Amir is on the call. So if he wants to correct me and flip on his video, he can do that and say, no, there's something else I wanted to ask. Amir, you're more than welcome to do that. So that's all the questions for the Facebook page. And again, if you're interested in speaking to John directly, if you'd like to, you can do video. Otherwise, if you'd rather keep video off and would just like to speak, I'll call your name and then you can go ahead and start talking. Because I think, Leah, you've already unmuted your microphone, so I think you're eager to ask John a question.
Oh, I think that was a mistake.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah. No. I updated and joined with my mic. But I'm participating by listening.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So
I just
Holly.
wanted to say, sorry.
Sorry. Go for it.
Yeah, I didn't know they were different teams. That's why I was confused about the problem framing. But if they are different teams, then yeah, fine. Thank you. Thank you so much, John.
Oh, no problem. I mean, at times you might have the same team doing it, right? Because you just want to have a better understanding of what is the problem that we're solving. And also, like, what I would like people to understand is problem framing can also be a process, It's just like checking some boxes. Do we have a business need? Yes. Do we know who our user is? Yes. Can we formulate a good challenge. Yes, this takes half an hour, all good. Yes, let's run the sprint, so you don't need to make it such a big lengthy process. You don't need a workshop all the time. It's just make sure that you're like ready to go into a sprint and you've covered all of the bases. That's all there is to problem framing.
Okay. Holly, did you have a question?
I do. Hello.
Hey,
I actually have two, but I think they're pretty quick questions. So the first one that I wanted to ask, how do you know when you have a well-framed problem, a problem that's ready for a design sprint?
And that's why you have the different type of teams, right? And you have the key executive stakeholders in the problem framing, because this is their job to make this kind of decisions. And then as a facilitator, you just want to make sure that the scope is not too broad, right? And it can be contained into a design sprint. But usually, like, these people are very good at making decisions, and they can agree on good problems that are important to them. The two criteria that we have, I'm going to repeat them, is one, it's important for the business, and they're able to articulate why is it important, how are they going to measure success, why do they want to invest in it? So that's one dimension. And the other one is, does it really map to some sort of a customer problem pain point? So we want to make sure that we have these two dimensions first of all. And then we're looking at stuff like, can this problem be solved through maybe best practice? For example, you're thinking you want to just change the checkout on your website. I mean, yeah, maybe you want to revamp that, but they're like already best practice in that area. Maybe you don't need to run a design sprint. You're just letting your product UX team take care of that in their day-to-day,
Yeah, because I would think that there's some like decision in terms of like the ladder of abstraction, right? If it's too high, then it's, you can't do it, it's hard to align. If it's too low, it's too tactical. So I would think for a design sprint, it's got to be, there's a point where it's sort of the right level.
Right,
and everybody
and we're using a lot of abstraction or abstract lettering in this framing workshop. So every answer that the stakeholders give, we're putting it on this scale from abstract to concrete, and we're trying to get as much concrete stuff out of them, because if it's too abstract, then it's not actionable, right? We can't really move forward. So yeah.
So if I can real quick, the second question sort of linked a little bit to the first one is, so you just shared that you use abstraction lettering as a problem framing technique. You also shared in your presentation experience mapping or some mapping techniques. What other techniques do you use frequently for problem framing?
I think I had this discussion today with someone on LinkedIn, and they posted a video about value proposition canvas. That's a great tool again. But maybe you're working in a startup, and in a startup, a good tool would be a business model canvas, so you can understand the context. Maybe in other cases, you're looking at an industry map canvas, right, where you're looking at your company in relation with your competition. We actually did this at Design Sprint Academy, where we're trying to position ourselves in relationship with everyone else in the space. So it's pretty much any tool that helps you reach your purpose, which is understanding the context in which you're in, and then other tools for customers. You can have empathy maps, you can have user personas. Lots of companies have them, and they just hate it when they're just printed on the walls. You need to make them actually work for you, and you do this in this kind of workshops. If you don't have any kind of research, you can use a proto persona, which is basically your user based on assumptions.
Right.
Whatever works. When we're teaching this, we're teaching people to have the freedom to choose whatever tool serves the purpose. So you shouldn't be, ingrained, like, this is the process. We need to do the process like
every time.
Yeah.
Although I do like abstraction lettering almost every time, but yeah.
But that's like just a technique that can be applied to pretty much everything, and it just helps, because people tend to be, we don't have enough time, it's too abstract. Like, why don't you have enough time? Try to make it more concrete. And that's like one case where we're using this. Like, we don't have time because we're into meetings. We're being dragged into meetings too long. oh, that's different, you know, so that's already actionable.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Holly.
We have a couple of questions from Raul Espinoza in the chat. He writes, we use journey maps, secondary research, and primary research. Now, what's the best strategy for a new product? Most of the time, we have plenty of information of an existing user experience, but not for a new one, so we need to do a lot of research. How do you balance business framing versus user problem framing?
I mean, I think both business and users, they go into the same kind of workshop. I'm not a research specialist myself, so I'm not really sure what primary research is and what secondary research is. But as you can see in our case studies, we're either taking existing research, and our objective is just to make it really understandable. That's why we're putting it on experience maps. You know, it's easy for people to interact with it. And then, yeah, this is the second one. We're trying to make research, like people should play with it, should understand it. Like if you're bringing into this kind of workshop hundreds of pages of research, or even like a slide deck of 20 people, and then you're having your UX researcher talk the team through the research, that's not a good approach. Because people just get bored and they're not going to remember it. That's why make them interact with the research. And then, like, how much research is necessary? Sometimes 2 questions are just are enough. Like, we're not big fans of lengthy research cycles. So if we don't have any data, we're trying to do 4 or 5 interviews to get some qualitative insights and just see some patterns. And then we're trying to back them up by some quantitative data, which is surveys. And all in all, this whole thing shouldn't take more than a week worth of time, because design sprints are also about speed. You know, so we don't want to waste too much time doing research. No, we want to have enough to get us started, and then we're validating through design sprints.
Okay. He also asks about remote problem framing, and if you've had any experience with that.
I mean, one of the case studies we showed, part of this, we're doing it remote, right? Like building the map together with the product team on our client side in Mural, you know, trying to map all of the things. Yeah, there's a lot of part that goes remote. But then when you want to get the decision makers into the room, and as I said, most of the times, these are like senior executives in large organizations, it's much easier to do it in person. But the in-person thing is just like the very last bit of the problem framing process. So most of it actually is remote, using tools like Mural, Google Docs, where we're building the design sprint brief, you know, so
okay,
whatever it is. So a lot of it can be done remotely, but you need decisions after the problem framing. That's when you get people together and have them agree on things.
Raul says, thank you very much. Abel, you're up. What would you like to ask John today?
Yeah, so I was curious, how do you sell the problem framing session to clients who wouldn't be interested, or like they'd say that there's no time for it, that you could just go straight into building the solution, running the sprint. So basically, how do you sell problem framing?
I mean, problem framing is part of our design sprint process. So we're not doing design sprints without problem framing. We've done it before. We know what can happen. So we always have a certain level of problem framing in it. And then we're also working mostly with large organizations, and it's something that they actually ask for, because they want to make sure they've got the right direction, because they're committing resources to this design sprint. They're like key people. You're asking 3, 4, 5 days of their time. They want to know why. And I'm telling them, like, with 1 day problem framing, you'll have the answers to all of these questions. So it just gives them confidence. You can sell it as part of the design sprint, or you can even sell it as a standalone process, right?
Okay.
So to us, it's almost easier. It's almost easier to sell design sprints after we do problem framing, because they can see the value almost immediately. And as I was saying, is because part of the problem framing is these key stakeholders. They would rather spend just half a day to a day than go, I don't know, 5 days doing a design sprint. You know, it's just a much better proposition. Plus, it's more suited to their skill set, which is making decisions, looking at things like in context.
Okay, thanks, John. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, thank you.
Federico.
Federico, mi amigo.
So you just have to let me unmute.
Hi, guys.
There you go. Go for it.
I think I'm late. But
I think there's a recording, right, Robert?
Yeah, there is. I'm recording in the cloud. So yeah, you look good for the camera. You're all set. You can ask your question and you're good.
okay, I have the questions reading on the Facebook group. I didn't remember. Sorry, I was traveling all the whole night in a bus, so I'm kind of.
Federico, I answered both of them.
Oh,
yeah, we already answered your questions on Facebook, I think. Unless
so
you
don't worry.
want a different one.
I'll reach out to you and then like just fill you in with anything else. Okay, but you can watch the recording and the answers are there.
Okay. Thank you, John.
So, John, I did have one question I was waiting in the wings for. Do you find that the size of the organization will dictate the type of problem framing you do, or if you do problem framing at all? Do you tend to? Does the size of the organization matter?
Yeah, it does. You know, it does impact the type of problem framing you're doing, because all the time you need to do problem framing. Sometimes problem framing is just due diligence, making sure we have the right challenge, right people. Just checking the boxes, as I said earlier. And this can happen maybe in a startup scenario or a small company, or when you're working with a product team, for example, that they've been working together forever, you know, and then this can be a very speedy process. But then if you're working within a large organization, it's even like detective work, identifying all of the stakeholders that need to be part of the problem framing, or anyone that's like attached in any way to the problem you're trying to solve. So yeah, in that case, problem framing is very important. And only like aligning people, because a lot of time these people just don't talk to each other, and you don't want this to happen the first day of the design sprint, right? Because that can bring a lot of confusion there. You want to make sure that you have the decisions made before the design sprint, and in the design sprint, people go in with the certainty of knowing what the problem is, but still having the uncertainty of what the solution is. Because like, again, the design sprint is a problem solving process. It also says on the cover of the book, solve big problems, right? The first day is about understanding the problem. It's not defining the problem. And I think like lots of people are talking about what's the difference between design sprints and design thinking, you know, and how design sprints basically took the principles of design thinking, which is true to a certain extent. What they didn't take was the empathize and define part from design thinking, right? And this is what we're doing through problem framing. We're like defining the problem, we're bringing in some user empathy, and then we're using the design sprint process, which is a very structured process to solve it really quickly. You know, I think the big mistake is using design sprints to kind of trying to define problems or find problems. You use the design sprint to solve them.
Right. And my final question, and probably for the session, is related to the global virtual design sprint that we're currently running in April. For the teams that have chosen to do problem framing, we're kind of hampered because of the way I've structured it, in that there isn't an organization or an audience that is behind the actual problem or idea. It's the concept that was done through a lighting decision jam on what would be really intriguing to learn and to explore. In those situations, especially for what I'm attempting to do here, I'm doing a very light version of problem framing, where it's getting to what the perception of the design sprint team on what the problem is and how they'd like to tackle it. Do you have any recommendations on how to adjust my approach to this?
So what I would suggest is use the quick problem framing recipe that Dana, our head of training, wrote. And it's an article that's published. I can share it with you if you don't have it already. But this is a really good recipe, which is based on everything that we talked. And it's something that can take about 2 hour time. So it's like really quick, you know, and you can go through like what the challenge is, you know, and certain things around it, and also a little bit about the customer, and end up refining your initial statement. So that would be something that I would use, because it covers all of these aspects.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but if you do send it to me, I'll make it a standard with going forward in terms of those particular groups, or perhaps every sprint in terms of an option. Every mural that we do in the kickoff has a section for resources to learn about the design sprint process,
about, I think the only thing I have on problem framing is a promotional video that you've done on the workshops you do. So if I can get that from you, I'll definitely.
This is a step-by-step recipe, exactly how to work, how to do the workshop with timings and all of the activities and how to run them. So it's more than just a case study. So you can use this recipe.
Please, I would love that.
Okay, I will send it to you and then you can share it.
Oh, and Federico already put it in the chat. So
really?
He's done us both a favor. He was lightning quick faster than either one of us.
Thank you, Federico. Yes.
Even if you traveled overnight completely, you're still like.
You can still be useful in this conversation. Okay.
I have it on my favorites, on my markers on my web browser.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right.
Good.
So I think we're good. What I would recommend for everyone that's on the call right now is if you have any follow-up for John, go back to the event Facebook page and you can probably post there. He has all of the contacts up in the slides shown on the screen on how you can learn more about the Design Sprint Academy, all their digital touch points. You can also go to their website to learn about their workshops. They publish articles about different topics related to what they do. I think I've linked to the Design Sprint 3.0 article that you had up before, but if not, I'm going to add it. But overall, John, I really appreciate your time. I think this has been fantastic. I'm sure that a lot of other people on the call really appreciate your time too. But thank you so much for coming on and presenting about problem framing and Design Sprint 3.0.
And thank you for having me here, right? And everyone else who participated, like plenty of folks here. So thank you everyone for taking the time.